أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى وقوله الحق وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي صدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. The verse that I recited is from chapter 89, Surah Fajr, verse number 27, 28, 29, and 30, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing this satisfied soul, nafs, which is mutma'in, and addressing it to come back towards Allah in the state where He is pleasing and well pleased. Allah is addressing it to enter among the ibad and the servants and enter into His paradise. Every day when we begin our discussion, we start with the tafsir, a little bit of a tafsir of this verse. Yesterday we went into the details as to who this nafs mutmain is. Do we possess this nafs mutmain or not? And today we want to take it further. When we had declared that where should we look for this nafs mutmain and how should we attain this nafs mutmain, we refer to another verse of Quran which says ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub, that with the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the serenity of the heart is attained. And then Allah Himself is saying in Quran that aqim as-salata li dhikri, the best way to do my dhikr is this salat. So it's basically a very simple formula if you follow. Quran is leading us, and that's why tafsir of Quran with Quran is one of the most amazing things as far as the tafsir is concerned, that one of the ways of doing tafsir is through Quran itself. It posed a question that this nafs mutmain, which we all want to attain, how do you get to this nafs mutmain? It says through the zikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How do we do this zikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It says aqim as-salata li dhikri. All of these are verses from Quran. Establish the prayer so that you may be able to do my zikr. The best method of doing the zikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is through this salat. Now we have discussed a great deal in regards to this salat. We've been implementing, or the interpretation, we mentioned there are two types of things. There's tafsir and there's tatbiq. Tafsir of the surah ayah is in regards to when it was revealed. Tatbiq and the implementation of the verse where we say nafs mutmain is in the form of Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam, which we've been mentioning from the very first day. So over here we understand how to attain this nafs mutmain. And this nafs mutmain is attained through the zikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this zikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is done through this salat. And there's a great deal that has been mentioned in regards to salat. That if salat is something which is accepted, everything else is accepted. If salat is not accepted, then nothing else is accepted. This is how important this salat is. I've spoken a great deal about salat. I'm sure you've heard from many other scholars over here a great deal about this salat. We look at that one of the ahadith of our 11th Imam in which he says, Innal wusula ilallahi safarun. That reaching Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a travel. You have to travel, you have to do safar. Not the English safar, the Urdu, the Arabic safar, which means to travel. In the wusul and reaching Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's a travel that you have to do. La yudraku illa bi imtita'il layl. It cannot be attained except at night time. Except at night time. Now the misconception in regards to the night time that we have, unfortunately, is that after midnight is when the night begins. So after midnight, usually, you've already put the kids to sleep. You don't want anyone to be up at that time. You got tomorrow, you have to go to work, you have school, you have all those things. You need to sleep at night. So that means, according to these ahadith that we have from Masumeen, we cannot do any ibadat at night. Because all the ibadat that are mentioned at night time, our belief that night starts from midnight. No. Night begins when sun sets. These days, night begins at 5:30 or even before that. This is when all of these ibadat are recommended to be performed. Not when it's nisful layl, when it's midnight, that you should fall asleep at that time so that you can get up early in the morning. This is where we see these ahadith are so practical. When Masumeen are saying that they're spending time performing the ibadat at night, does not mean that they have nothing to do the next day and they're free of everything, so they had all the time in the world to do all of those things. No. Night is spent and night is utilized properly. And that's why some of the habits, if you want to learn from the society that we live in, these people are done with their dinners by 6 o'clock. Whereas in our Desi culture, 6 o'clock is evening time. We eat late and then we sleep late. And that's why all the other health issues that are pertaining to the, our people are there, that I don't have time to get into the details of because it's off topic. So simple, Imam is telling us, Innal wusula ilallahi. Everybody is trying to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wusul and reaching Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is attained through this worship which is done at night time. What kind of worship? So over here, first thing we have established that reaching Allah is not impossible. Because if it was impossible, Imam would not be telling us. And not only that it is not impossible, that is actually within our reach. Don't think it is a very difficult task. I cannot do all of those ibadat. I cannot do all of those things. We see books that we have which are filled with these recommendations, ibadat, and the du'as. Seems like that it is written for those people who have nothing to do and they have retired. That is not the case. These ibadat that are mentioned in these books, such as Mafatihul Jinan, or the previous older books of du'as and ad'iyah, Kamilul Ziyarat, or Baladul Amin, and all of those other books, they're not for those people who have retired and have nothing to do anymore. No, these are actually for you and I. But he said, how am I able to follow if it says do this at this time? There's an ibadat for the morning time. There's an ibadat for the next hour. There's an ibadat for the afternoon. There's an ibadat for the later afternoon. There's an ibadat for the evening time. There's ibadat for the night time. There's constantly a dua and an ibadat for every single hour there is, basically. It cannot be addressing me. No, it is addressing you. How is it possible? You choose the one which suits you. You go to the airport, there's a flight from New York to LA every hour. 9 in the morning, 10 in the morning, 11 in the morning. You don't take all of those flights. You take the one which suits your schedule. Du'as, adiyah, namaz, and all of these ibadat which are recommended are the same way. You choose the one which suits you. Instead of leaving every one of these ibadat and letting go of all of these adiyah and du'as, saying that it is not for me, choose the one which suits your schedule and go ahead and perform. This is again among the mercies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He has given us so many doors, so many opportunities, whichever you want to pick and choose to go ahead and perform these ibadat. Salawat biji Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And so we see that this namaz is very important. Forget about the mustahab namaz that hardly anyone gets the chance to do. Wajib itself, it's very important. And the reason I'm addressing it, because I see a lot more younger kids in the crowd today, and so we can implement this issue of how important this salat is to them from the very young age. It will be beneficial. But it has to come from the leadership. It has to come from the leadership that they look up to. And that is not in the masajid or in the centers. That is within the houses. If what the parents are doing, if what the elders are doing, and it's not just the parents, even the elder siblings, And what they're doing is going to be implementing on these kids as well. If they see their elders doing things on time, they will learn that it is very important for them to do these things on time as well. We see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, initially there was 51 rakat which was wajib upon us. But it was the concession that was given to the ummah of Rasulullah that is only 17 rakat that is wajib upon us. How long does it take to perform these 17? 17 minutes if you give 1 rakat a minute. Out of 24 hours that you have during the day, 17 minutes for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That too on time. That's very important. That too on time. Because one of the nasaih or the advices of our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, at the time of his wafat, at the time of his demise, when he gathered all of his family members, what did he say? He said, "La yanalu shafa'atana man istakhaffa bis-salat." Our intercession and shafa'at will not reach that individual who takes the salat lightly. What does it mean to take the salat lightly? One of the meanings of taking the salat lightly is not praying on time, delaying it for something else, which is less important. I don't think anything could be more important than salat, but sometimes you're coerced into doing something which is probably at the moment more wajib. But aside from those few exceptions, majority of the time we are delaying it for something which is less important. Don't want to go into the examples of it, what could be less important or what could be more important. You can figure that out yourself. But that happens to everyone. I'll pray. There's plenty of time. There's 6 hours is still for Zohar to be qasr, or qaza rather. I'll pray. In fact, I'll do one wudu for Zohar, Asr and Maghrib, Isha. Hopefully they don't do it for all 5 prayers. So these are the things that we are taking the salat lightly. What did Imam say? La yanalu shafa'atana man istakhaffa bis-salat. Do you think you have complete understanding and do you have complete belief that your actions will take you to the paradise that is promised to us without the intercession of Masumeen? If you believe that you will not require the intercession, then that's fine what you're doing. But if we believe that we will definitely be in need of the intercession of Masumeen on the Day of Judgment, then there's one less person that Imam will be doing the shafa'at, or sixth Imam will be doing the shafa'at of. The one who has taken the salat lightly. Imam did not say in regards to the person who doesn't pray. Why? There's a simple ayat in Quran. In Surah Muddassir, what does it say? مَا سَلَكَكُمْ فِي سَقَرٍ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ عَنِ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. The criminals will be asked, what happened that you ended up being in the hell? قَالُوا لَمْ نَكُ مِنَ الْمُصَلِّينَ. The first reply will be that we were not among the musallin. We did not used to pray. That is the reason we ended up being over here. So the concept of shafa'at is when you take this salat lightly. Forget about not praying. That already has a ruling attached with it. So that's one message that I wanted to convey. We look at the messages that we are learning from Ashura. That on the day which is known as Ashur, 10th of Muharram, Imam is in the middle of the battlefield. One of his companions by the name Abu Thamama as-Sa'idi comes up to Imam and says, "Oh Imam, Han al-waqt as-salat. Isn't it time for salat?" If it was someone else would have said, "What are you talking about? We're in the middle of jihad. Who has time to pray?" Instead, Imam turns around and says, "Oh Abu Thamama, thank you for reminding us about salat. You reminded us of salat, thank you for that. And Imam performs Salat-e-Ishq at that time. Imam performs Salat-e-Khawf at that time. Imam performs that Salat right in the middle of that desert. Right when this battlefield, in the middle of the battlefield, when the battle is taking place. This is where we understand, if we are extracting messages from Ashura, if you are extracting messages from the life of our Imam, this is probably among the most important of the messages. We see that two other things that are mentioned in this ayat that I have recited, as we've been doing the tafsir of this ayat as well, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not say, Ya ayyatuhan nafsul, He said, Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutmainna. Insan is made up of what? Is compound of this body and soul. Allah did not say, Ya ayyatuhal jismul mutmainna. Oh, the satisfied body. No, He said, oh, the satisfied soul. To make us understand that how important this soul is. Among the two elements of the creation, the most important one is the soul. But unfortunately, people are more after beautification of their bodies, which are less important, and not towards the beautification of their souls. We are corrupting our souls every single day by the things that we hear, by the things that we see, by the things that we say, by lying, by backbiting, by doing ghibat and whatnot. Every single one of these things is corrupting the soul of insan and human being. We're after the beautification of the body. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not say, Ya ayyatuhal jismul mutmainna. He said, Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutmainna. Oh, the serene soul. Therefore, this soul is something which has to be beautified, given beautification. Remember an incident. We all know Luqman, the chapter in Quran. Luqman is referred to as Luqman Hakim. Before he became Hakim, he always had the wisdom. But in his early life, he was a slave. And so his master told him that this year we're going to cultivate, sesame, because it seems like a good time for that, and we will be able to benefit from it. He in his own mind goes and he cultivates wheat or something else. And when the time for harvesting comes, his master comes and sees there's no sesame, there's no corn, for example, or something that he had told him. It's actually the wheat or the barley. He said, didn't I tell you to go ahead and cultivate that? Why didn't you listen to me? He said, well, I thought to myself, this is what Luqman said, I thought to myself that I'll, cultivate barley and, wheat will come out of it. Or I'll cultivate, for example, barley and sesame will come out of it. He said, have you gone mad? Do you understand what you're saying? Has it ever happened that you cultivate something else and harvest something else? He said, well, yeah, I've seen it in your kalam. He said, what do you mean? He said, I've seen you lie to people. I've seen you backbite. I've seen you harm people. I've seen you take possession of people's property. I've seen you hurt people, and all the time you're claiming that you will end up in the paradise. So I don't understand as to how all of your black actions will turn into beautiful greenery of the paradise. If that is possible, then if I go ahead and cultivate today, for example, wheat, it might turn into sesame or something else as well. His master understood that Luqman was actually setting a parable or example for him. He said, from this day, you're hur, you're azad. You're a very, very wise man, and you're hur, you're azad. You've taught me a great lesson. This is where this example came about. Az mukafat amal ghafil mashu. Gandum as gandum beruyad, Jawza jaw. Do not be heedless about the mukafat amal, the reaction of the actions that you perform. What you do today, you will receive that tomorrow. Gandum as gandum beruyat. When you cultivate wheat, you will going to go ahead and harvest wheat. If you go ahead and cultivate barley, you will go ahead and harvest that. You will not get the one or the other. So we understand that we're always behind beautification of what? This physical body of ours. There's nothing wrong with it. You should be able to keep yourself presentable. But what use of this beautification is when the inside of insan, when the soul of insan is corrupted. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutmainna. He's not saying Ya ayyatuhul jismul mutmainna. Keeping that in mind, among the messages from Ashura is the ethical messages that we attain from it. Ethics is actually a very important element of Islam. There are three main elements. One is in the form of aqaid. Second is in the form of ahkam. Third is in the form of akhlaq. Beliefs, the actions that we perform, ahkam, and the akhlaq. These three are the basic three elements of our religion. You need to have all three of them to have a complete formula. You cannot just say, I have the beliefs. I believe in all the beliefs that are there. The oneness of God, His adalat, the day of judgment, and so forth, and not do any of the actions. I've heard this many times that, Moulana, my son is very good. He doesn't lie, but he never prays. He's a good person. He will not harm anyone, but he doesn't fast. That's very good that you have these akhlaq-i hasana, that you don't lie, you don't harm anyone, you don't do any of these things. But you can't say and rely only on those things. Likewise, a person who prays and does all of those things and does not have any akhlaq is the same way. You pray, you fast, you do all of the wajibat that are obligation upon you, yet you're zero when it comes to akhlaq. The method of speaking to another individual tells the whole story. That tells us, who do we follow? Who are we the followers of? Are we the followers of those who were saying, Inni bu'ithtu li'utammima makarim al-akhlaq? I have been sent to perfect the highest level of akhlaq. If we are followers of those, then our akhlaq should be at the same level as well. Prophet said this when he first came. I am sent not to teach you this, not to teach you that. Utammima makarim al-akhlaq. To perfect the highest level of akhlaq and the ethics. Unfortunately, the picture of Muslimin that is drawn and given and presented in the world is ill-mannered, have no akhlaq, none whatsoever. Unfortunately, that is on the contrary. So we see among the things that we learn, who is going to teach us these akhlaq? Is the Masumeen. Because they're mujassam, embodiment of akhlaq themselves. Every single action of theirs is filled with akhlaq and akhlaq-i hasana. So we're going to refer towards them. We see that one of the things that this Ashura teaches us, and one of the akhlaq of this Ashura is the concept of freedom that Imam has taught us. There are many things that you can derive from it. The concept of patience is derived. The concept of forbearance is derived. The concept of shahadat is derived. The concept of preferring others over yourself, which is known as isar, is derived. The concept of freedom is also derived from among the messages of Ashura. And today I wanted to quote a few quotes from Masumeen, especially from Imam Hussein, in regards to hurriyat and freedom. But before we go into this, we look at Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam al-Muttaqeen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam. That he says, Ala hurrun yada'u hadhihi al-lamadhatu li ahliha. This world that we're always after. Look how Imam is giving the analogy of this world. He says, Ala hurrun, is there no free men? Yada'u hadhihi al-lamadhata, who lets go of this lamadha. What is lamadha? Lamadha is referred to as a chewed upon morsel. For example, you were sitting in a restaurant, waiting for the table to be, reserved for you or to be set for you. You were brought on, and you saw someone had already eaten over there, and they left the food, a sandwich they had taken bite from. Definitely, you're not going to touch it. It might be completely okay for you to eat, but you're not going to eat it. Someone had left behind, half-chewn, a half-eaten sandwich or whatever. You don't touch it. Imam is giving the analogy of this world. Yes. This world, Imam is comparing with half-bitten morsel. Imagine that. Half-bitten morsel that you don't even touch. You abhor, you won't even eat it. Imam is comparing that with this world. That world which we're always after. Is there a free man among you who leaves this half-bitten morsel to those who are deserving? Those who are ahl of it? Because your souls, Imam continues by saying, إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ لِأَنفُسِكُمْ ثَمَنٌ إِلَّا الْجَنَّةِ. There's nothing that could be compared to your souls except the paradise. لَا تَبِيعُوهَا إِلَّا بِهَا. Do not sell your souls except for paradise. Leave this world for these people who want to attain it, who want to grab it. And the analogy is so beautiful. Half-bitten morsel. Allahu Akbar. How Imam is giving such examples that right away you get the picture. In one sentence you get the picture. So let go of it. Let it be for those people who are deserving it. You do not deserve it. What you deserve and what your soul deserves is something much better than that. La tabi'uha illa al-jannah. Do not sell it for anything less than paradise. And now we refer towards as to how sometimes when we are running after this world and the worldly affairs, how we forget that the purpose of our creation and the commands for whom we should be following the commands of. We forget the real message of it. Refer to ayat of Quran in Surah Tawbah chapter 9 verse number 24. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ إِنْ كَانَ آبَاؤُكُمْ أَوْ أَبْنَاؤُكُمْ أَوْ إِخْوَانَكُمْ وَعَشِيرَتَكُمْ وَأَزْوَاجُكُمْ وَأَشِيرَتَكُمْ. If your forefathers, your children, your brothers, your kinsfolk, your family members, and your spouses, أَوْ أَمْوَالٌ اقْتَرَفْتُمُوهَا, and the wealth that you have accumulated, أَوْ تِجَارَةٌ تَخْشَوْنَ كَسَادَهَا, the tijarat, the trade that you fear you will have a loss in, أَحَبَّ إِلَيْكُمْ, is more beloved to you, مِنَ اللَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِهِ وَجِهَادٍ فِي سَبِيلِهِ, if it's more beloved to you than Allah, then His Prophet, or the jihad in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَتَرَبَّصُوا, then wait for the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ, that until this decree comes upon you. What is he trying to say over here? 5 groups of people are addressed. Your Aba, your brothers, your children, your spouses, and your family members. In fact, Allah has not left anyone out of it. Could you imagine someone else? Yeah, maybe neighbors. But as far as all of those who belong to you, Allah has covered them all. Surah Tawbah, verse number 24. He says, your Abba, your brothers, your sisters, your family members, your spouses, everyone. If they're more beloved to you than Allah and His Prophet and the jihad fi sabilillah, fatarabbasu. Then wait for the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is He trying to say? Sometimes when we get into these worldly affairs, we start doing things and we start selling our soul for so easily. And examples that I usually give at this ayat is that our fathers might say something, we'll go ahead and do it. Our mothers will demand something, we'll go ahead and do it. Our spouses will demand something, we'll go ahead and do it. There's nothing wrong with doing what they're demanding, as long as it is not against what Allah is demanding. As long as it's not against what Prophet has demanded. And usually the examples that I give at this point is a spouse's husband telling the wife, you don't need to do hijab. The wife is majboor, listen to the husband. I gotta stay with this person under the same roof. Wife is telling husband, don't keep beard, for example, among the many things. You gotta listen to the wife. You can't turn her down. Children are getting married. They want to have a function, and they're going to have all the things that they're there in a function, and just hinting towards it. You're majboor. You can't do anything. Refer to this ayat. Surah Tawbah, verse number 24. What does it say? It says, قُلْ إِنْ كَانَ آبَاؤُكُمْ وَأَبْنَاؤُكُمْ وَإِخْوَانُكُمْ وَأَزْوَاجُكُمْ وَأَشِيرَتُكُمْ. If these individuals are preferred over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Rasul because of the teachings that they have provided, and if things are going against it, فَتَرَبَّصُوا. Then wait for the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that comes down upon you. And the ayat ends with this, Wallahu la yahdi al-qawm al-fasiqun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not guide the people who are among fasiqun. So those who go against these teachings and those who lean towards these family members, the teachings which are going against the teachings of Allah and the Prophet, Allah is referring towards those people as fasiqun. I want to go quickly as possible towards one message that we want to attain from Ashura. Among the messages that are there from Ashura, one message that we want to attain today is the message of hurriyat, being azad and being free. Don't fall prey to all of these demands that you have in your society. Freedom is that when you're only slave to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and no one else. In the time of our seventh Imam, he was passing by a street. He heard the sound of music coming from a house. He knocked on the door. A lady came out. Imam said, is your master a free person or a slave? She said, he's free. He's not a slave. Imam says, I wish he was a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam left. Lady goes inside. The master says, who was it? He said, I don't know. Someone stopped and said, is the owner of this house, is he a slave or a master? Is he a slave or a free man? I said, you're free. And he said, I wish he was a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If he was a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he would not be doing what he's doing. Right away, this person whose name was Bishra Hafi or Bushra Hafi, this struck. Right away, he left the house. Ran after Imam and sought Tawbah. And his Tawbah was accepted, of course. So be a slave only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do not be slave of anyone else. We are the followers of Imam al-Muttaqiyan, who in his ibadat even is showing that how we are the abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam, that famous comparison that he has in qawman abadullaha rahbatan. There's a group of people who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of fear. Tilka ibadatul abid. That is the ibadat of a slave. Inna qawman abadullaha raghbatan. There are people who worship Allah because they want something in return. Tilka ibadatul tujjar. This is a businessman-like ibadat. Inna qawman abadullah shukran lahu. There's a group of people who worship Allah to thank Him. Tilka ibadatul ahrar. This is the ibadat and the worship of those who are free. Even in the worship and the ibadat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Imam wants to point out, don't worship because of the fear of the hell. Don't worship because of the, you want greed of the paradise. Worship because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is worthy of worship. Salawat bi Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Almost out of my time. Very quickly, that Imam alayhi salatu wassalam, among the ahadith that we have heard, or the things that we have that have reached us, Imam said, "Mautun fi izzin khairun min hayat fi dhullin." This actually became a slang for many languages even. Imam said, "Maut, death, fi izzin, in honor is better than hayat in dishonor." And that's the concept of hurriyat and the freedom that Imam alayhi salatu wasalam is trying to give us. That even at the time when Imam is under the attack, he has been brought to the ground, he looks towards the enemy who's advancing towards the tents of Imam. What does Imam says? In lam yakun lakum deenun. If you do not have any religion, wala takhafuna min al-ma'ad, and you do not fear the day of judgment, kunu ahraran. At least be free fi dunyakum. At least be free in your world. While I'm alive, do not attack the tents. As long as I'm alive, have your direction towards me. Imam is addressing these individuals to be hur and azad even at that time. And we also see in the example of Hazrat Hur as well. We recited the Masa'ib of Hur yesterday, that when Imam was at the body of Hur, these are the words that Imam said to him. He said that Anta hurrun kama sammatka ummuka. You are Hur, you're free, and your mother has named you correctly. Anta hurrun fil dunya wa hurrun fil akhirah. You are free in this world and you are free in the hereafter. Again, among the messages from Ashura, today this one message that we had learned. Message of freedom. Message of being azad. Message of only being Abidullah and Abdullah and no one else. Nobody will deny. I said, no, we are only worshippers of Allah. If that was the case, the verses of Quran will not be saying, look at that individual who is a worshipper of his own hawa nafs, his own desires. Imam alayhi salatu wasalam, when he comes towards Karbala, and I'm trying to bring you towards Masa'ib, inshallah, that when Imam comes towards Karbala, these people that have come with Imam alayhi salatu wasalam, they're all free people. There are no slaves in them. There were slaves before, but their masters are no longer alive. Among them is an individual who's an old friend of Imam. Literally, Imam grew up with him from the very early days of his life. Imagine having your own childhood friend that you grew up with. How dear are those people to you? And at this point, Imam, when after the death of Muslim ibn Aqil, Imam gave out 12 flags. He had given each to 11 people. One was empty. One was not given out. Everybody was hoping that this flag will reach that individual. Imam, can we have this flag? Imam, can we have this flag? Imam, no, you're on haqq. You're good on your own, but this flag belongs to an individual whom I'm waiting for. And this is where Imam writes a letter. Min al-Husayn ibn Ali ila al-Rajul al-Faqih. From Husayn ibn Ali to a person who is a faqih, a knowledgeable person. We all know who faqih is, referred to al-Maraji as faqih. Imam is writing this letter to Habib ibn Mazahir. He said, you know our qarabat to Rasulullah. You know our relation with Rasulullah. You know us better than anyone else. We need your help, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you recompense for the help that you provide. Cutting it short, Habib gets this letter, brings it inside his house. His family was waiting, sitting there. He reads the letter, tells his wife, there's a letter from son of Rasulullah who has invited me. She said, what does he say? He said, he's inviting me towards Karbala. So what have you decided? He said, well, I'm thinking if I go, you will become a widow. My children will become orphans. Right away, wife of Habib stands up and says, if you're not going to go, and you're worried about me becoming a widow and your children becoming orphans, have you not thought that the wife of Hussein will become a widow and the children of Hussein will become orphans? If you're not going to go, then I'm going to go. Habib says, I was only testing you. And then Habib goes towards Karbala. The whole incident, I'm sure you've heard it many times, that Habib makes himself reach Karbala. And as soon as he arrives in Karbala, the news spreads into the tents. Janab Zainab asks Fizza, who has come? She says, the old friend of Hussein, Habib ibn Mazahir has come. Janab Zainab says, oh Fizza, send my salam and convey my salam to Habib. Fizza comes out of the tent and goes towards Hussein, Imam Hussein and Habib ibn Mazahir. When she sees him, he says, oh Habib, welcome. Shahzadi Zainab has conveyed her salam to you. Habib throws himself onto the ground. He throws dust onto his face, on his head. And he said, the time has come that Nabi Zadi, the daughter of Rasulullah, daughter of Ali and Batul, is sending salutations and salam onto us. This is the ghurbat. Imagine. But unfortunately, this was the decree. And when Habib ibn Mazahir, time comes for his shahadat. On the day of Ashur, which is no less than the day of judgment, we see that every single individual wants to go ahead and sacrifice themselves. Among the ithar that we have seen on the day of Ashur, that the people, that the companions, their ithar and their preference of others upon themselves is that they do not let any of the Banu Hashim go before they have sacrificed themselves. We see that every single companion is going. Imam goes and picks up the body of that dead and brings it back. Every single person goes, Imam goes and brings the body. Salam on Imam Hussein, that how he's handling this, that he has to pick up the body of every single shaheed. And lastly comes the time that Habib wants to go towards Maqtal. When Habib goes towards Maqtal, this is the old friend of Imam Hussein. He wants to go ahead and sacrifice himself before Imam. Imam has kept him dear to himself all of this life. Habib goes and he fights. And the time comes that Habib has fallen onto the ground. Imam rushes towards the Maqtal to go ahead and save Habib, the whole friend of Imam, from the hands of the enemies. This is where Imam picks up Habib. But there's this other thing that you see in the face of Imam that you had not seen. When he was picking up the bodies of other companions, Imam was not feeling this way. There are different emotions on the face of Imam. When he picks up the body of Habib, Habib is no ordinary individual. It is the oldest friend of Imam. He himself is very old. But Habib was martyred in the lands of Karbala. You've heard these masaib many times, but one thing that you usually don't hear is that when the heads of the shuhada were being taken towards Kufa, remember Habib's child, he was in Kufa when the heads were brought into the Kufa. Habib's child, his son was looking for what has happened to his father. He sees that the caravan has come in. He goes towards the people and he says, what happened to Habib? They tell him that Habib was martyred and there his head is. Right away the son of Habib goes towards the side of his father and he wants to take back the head from the enemy, and he fights and he struggles to get the head back. This is what he says. He says, how dare can anyone has the head of my dad, my father, who has been slain and has been martyred? Look at the comparison over here, that Imam Sajjad and the Mazlumiyat of Imam Sajjad, that Habib's son will not let anyone have the head of his father as long as he's over there. But the Mazlumiyat of Imam Sajjad is that he's the leader of this caravan. He's traveling with this caravan, and throughout this travel, the head of his father is in front of him, but he cannot do anything. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. ماتم حسين.